Hello and welcome to Property Matters. My name's Stephen Galpin, and each programme we're going to be looking at the current matters that concern the property market right across the country. And with me today is John Howard. John, welcome.
It's great to be back.
Good. Well, for the viewers that don't know you, you are a property developer, you have interest in estate agency, you're an author and a mentor to many young developers.
I am.
Good. Well, welcome to you.
Thank you.
John, clearly we are all hoping we're on the way out of this pandemic. Whether we are or not's a different matter.
Yep.
We've got all sorts of things going on in the property market. What I'd first like to look at though, as a developer, how are you finding the market? Are you finding there is still interest there? Is it resurrecting itself? What's happening?
Well, I think the good news is that it's the right time of year. People have been in lockdown for 3 or 4 months. They've sat and thought about their lifestyle and what they want to do. And certainly with the estate agencies we've got in mainly Norfolk, what's happening is people a lot from London and elsewhere are looking for a different lifestyle, quality of life, and they're leaving London and other places to go and buy in Norfolk. The ones who have already got a holiday home in Norfolk are selling that and buying a bigger home. Mm-hmm. And I think people who perhaps in 5 years' time were going to make that move are now making it now and saying, you know what, we want to make it now, we want to do it quickly, just in case there's another lockdown as well. Mm-hmm. So there's a real combination of circumstances going on. And actually property prices in Norfolk are rising. We're getting above asking prices for a lot of properties, and we're getting 2 or 3 buyers on each one competing against each other for them.
Okay, and is this within the price bracket of the new threshold for stamp duty?
Well, certainly that hasn't done any harm at all, has it, under 500k? And of course in Norfolk you can buy a nice cottage for less than 500,000. But no, we're getting a lot of people at 1 to 1.5 million, cash buyers from London and elsewhere. It really is transforming.
Well, they get the pro rata saving on the first
absolutely.
500, don't they?
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's all helping. How long it's going to last, I don't see it lasting too long, Stephen. And I know that I don't know, but I'd be interested to see what you think. But
well,
my view is, come January, February, it's dark, it's miserable. You know, this is the right time for people to move. It's the summer. You know, there's a lot going on. They've sat down for 4 months thinking about what they want to do, and there's definitely a huge enthusiasm at the moment. Most agents are busy.
Okay. But you see, John, where I differentiate, I mean, we have this little bit of banter on various other programmes that we can do.
We do.
I tend to think rather London-centric.
You do.
And the difference I see is that where you are, perhaps the sort of area of operation that you're in, people are buying real homes.
They are.
They're wanting to move in, have a family there, all the rest of it. My environment here in London, especially in these kind of areas like Canary Wharf, it's very much a sort of transient sort of occupant, isn't it? You know, they come, they invest, they move out, they go on, or they rent. And my concern is, I look across the road here at a couple of buildings that have got getting towards 1,000 apartments in each block.
Scary.
It is scary because the cost of those blocks is probably £500 million development value. Now, what's going to happen? Most of those have been sold off-plan abroad, in the Far East, in the Asia-Pacific areas. I'm not sure how many of those governments abroad will even allow their people to send money abroad for speculative property investment. It wouldn't surprise me to see exchange controls coming in various countries, and not least this one, because inward investment is obviously a terrific boost for home investment, isn't it?
It's a massive boost.
Now, whereas 20 years ago, where 25 or 30 stories was considered pretty high, and you'd be calling it
still is in my world.
Yeah, right. But where you've got 70 stories here, the cost of the building has gone up, and if there is a financial hit to the developers, the banks aren't going to be able to stand it.
No.
Because no longer is it 100 million, 150 million, it's £500 million.
It's £500 million. It's huge amounts of money. And I mean, the development we're doing in Ipswich, which is 20 stories high, sales have done very, thanks for asking, by the way, sales are going very well, Stephen.
Right.
And we've kept them going during the lockdown.
Yeah.
And we've got lots of viewing going on, and we are selling them. But what people forget is I'm paying £16,000 a month empty rates at the moment on the ones I haven't sold. 16,000 a month. That's just a small company like ours. So, what on earth is the cost in here at Canary Wharf on the ones that are empty? Because as soon as they're finished, you get that certificate to say it's complete from the council. They're sending you the rate demand the next day.
Sure.
And that's a massive problem, cash flow problem alone for people.
So if you were to predict a scenario, what do you think is going to happen in the London market?
Well, I think the London market could be in big trouble. And the reason I say that is because when you look at it, the young people are going to want to stay in London. They're going to want to have the vibe. They're going to want to enjoy working in London. But there's so many other people now who travel to London every day to work, who no longer need to do so. They might need to come in once a week. They want a better quality of life. They want to work from home. They want to look after their children. Environmentally, it's great for the environment, of course, as well, Stephen. They're not travelling everywhere every day, and they're saving themselves a fortune. They're saving themselves, 5, 6, 7, 8,000 a year each, plus parking. And I think a lot of companies now realise that they don't need their staff to be in every day. They're working extremely well at home. I'm not saying they don't need to come in once a week or something to see people. Well, they probably do. But an awful lot of people don't need to do so. And that's driving also the Norfolk and the Suffolk and other nice counties around where they can hop on a train within an hour and a half and get to London if they so wish. And I think going forward, I believe we've come forward 10 years in 4 months. And I honestly believe that. And I don't think it's going to go back. London will change. A lot of the cities, I think, and the towns will change. They will become almost inner villages where there's an awful lot more residential conversion from commercial. And they'll have some shops, of course, but there'll be, selective shops. And the outer town stores will just get stronger and stronger and stronger, as will online activities.
So, John, for instance, in the development you're doing in Ipswich, how many are what I would call real purchasers wanting a home, as opposed to perhaps buy-to-let investors?
Virtually everyone is a home owner as such.
Right.
Yeah, virtually everyone.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, it's almost the reverse here, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think the problem here, because of that, there's no sustainability. So, if less people are going to be working in London, less people need to live in London, it's going to be, it will sort itself out. And, if you're in Mayfair or somewhere, yes, it will drop, but who really cares too much? I think the really vulnerable areas are like this Canary Wharf, where we are here today, where there's 20-odd thousand flats, you said, half built, 3/4 built, massive. I mean, look how quiet it is, and it's not going to get that much busier in September.
No. You see, I think a lot of people forget the severity of some of these property recessions. I can remember, I'm just trying to think now how long ago it was, probably...
Was that the one in 1890?
Probably something like that.
Yeah, 1920.
Yes.
There was the 1930 recession.
Yeah. I was only quite young there in the 1800s, but anyway.
Yeah.
Now, I'm thinking back exactly 30 years.
Yes.
When the first developments were done down here.
1990?
When it was London Docklands Corporation.
Yes. Yeah.
Planning, there was no such thing as planning. You
No.
could build what you like
Yeah.
as long as the regs stacked
Yes.
up. And I remember the building down on the waterside there, I won't mention the name of it, but looks like a ski slope,
Yes.
was built very, very up to date, very modern, very trendy. Couldn't sell one. Couldn't sell one.
No.
So what did they do? They let the whole thing to the council.
Yeah.
But it took 15 years nearly to get it back into private ownership.
Yeah.
And I just wonder whether that's going to happen again, because again, the buildings I mentioned to you earlier down here, a 1-bedroom flat here now, John, is £850,000.
Don't mind me saying it was 4 months ago.
Well, it was.
I mean,
And
what will it be now?
Now that brings me on to the next question I very much wanted to ask you as a developer. What about the valuers? Because you see, at the end of the day, we can encourage this, we can encourage that, we can have cheap money, low interest money, but unless the valuers value the property correctly for the banks, there's no mortgages.
Well, what I would say, it is a micro market in the UK, isn't it? It's thousands of small markets, and actually, on the whole, the surveyors so far, the valuers, have been very sensible. Most of them haven't even seemed to put a COVID clause in. Some have put a COVID clause in the valuation to cover themselves, but others haven't. And actually, I said the market is strong in most areas. Now that will change, I believe, as you do, come next year. I mean, the unemployment, I believe, is going to go to 4 million plus. I think you talked earlier, thinking it might be the same. And I believe that employment drives the property prices. It's pretty obvious, really. The more people out of work, the less people there are to buy. And the ones who can buy are nervous about buying.
Yes.
So, you know, I think next year is going to be a big challenge. I think the year after is going to be an even bigger one. I would say, however, that it's a micro market. Some property prices may not go down. Some might go down a bit. If you're in Derby or somewhere like that, you could be vulnerable to Rolls-Royce losing a load of jobs. Who knows? But certainly, then you've got the sort of development and the commercial side of things, which again is very, very different to the domestic market. Domestic market, probably okay-ish. But the commercial market, my goodness, we're in for some changes.
Okay. All right, John, I think what we'll do now, we'll go to our commercial break.
Best to.
We'll come back after the break. Join us again then. Hello and welcome back to part 2 of Property Matters. I'm Stephen Galpin and with me is John Howard, property developer. John, welcome back.
Thank you.
John, we were just saying before the break, finances are going to be somewhat difficult for the property market over the next year or so. Maybe difficult or maybe just hard to understand. Now, we've got some incentives from the government. They've cut the stamp duty rate.
Yeah.
And well, not cut the rate, but put the threshold up for
Yes.
the first 500,000. Do you think that will really make a sustainable difference?
Well, I was a bit surprised they did it so soon because actually the market was pretty good anyway. I think they did it anticipating it won't be, and that's another sign, isn't it, Stephen, that they think things are going to get very grave. Otherwise, there's no way they'd have done it now because all the stats they were getting back, Rushi was getting back, would have said, the market's okay. So they obviously anticipating it's going to be tough next year. And all this business about it finishes in March. March about 2024, I think. Right. I mean, there's no way he's going to pull it in March.
Okay.
No way. And of course, you have to wonder also whether in the future it will ever go back. Because it's a tax that stops people from moving in different parts of the country. It's a tax. And actually, you could argue that's not what you want. You want people to be able to move easily from one part of the country to another in a recession to find work. And the stamp duty stops people doing that.
Right. Well, as you know, I've said for a long time, I would have loved to have seen stamp duty changed in terms of responsibility to the seller rather than the buyer.
Yeah.
I think it would be so much easier.
Yes.
It's a calculable cost.
Yes.
And it could also be funded, which it can't be at the moment.
Absolutely. People need to fund that.
But
you can't borrow the money to do the stamp
But
duty.
also, I'd rather hoped when he was looking at stamp duty this time, he would have just taken it off completely. Because what I don't appreciate is the fact that it's targeted at a certain part of the market. Because we're in an industry where the top end affects the bottom end and the bottom end affects the top end.
Well, I think it's costing the government $4 billion a year to do what they've done. You could argue that's in presence. A year ago, you'd have said that's a lot of money. Now we're saying only $4 billion. You know, they're giving so much money away.
Yeah, but here's the subtlety of the argument. It's not costing them $4 billion. It's just they're not going to get $4 billion's worth of estimated receipts.
Well, you could argue, of course, that you're absolutely right. And you could argue that actually something like whoever buys a property normally spends 5% of the price they pay for that property on repairing it, improving it. So actually you could argue they get that money back in different ways.
Absolutely.
Through VAT and everything else.
Yeah.
So actually you could argue, and I'm sure some very bright person sat there and explained to the Chancellor, actually, you're going to make yourself $4 billion out of doing this, not losing $4 billion. But you can make figures say and do what you want, really, can't you?
I would just like to come away from this scenario where certain part of the market gets locked. Because, I mean, flats down here again are pretty expensive.
Yes.
If you're buying a fairly good 2-bedroom flat down here in the probably £1.5 million
Yes.
bracket, you're probably talking £110,000 worth of stamp duty.
Awful lot of money.
That's a lot of money for even the wealthiest to find in terms of actual cash to add to the...
Well, I think the other thing is, what it does do, it stops people moving, because even if they can afford that, you think, well, why should I pay, that sort of money?
It's a dead tax.
I can go and buy a brand new car with it. I can do, I don't need to move. I'd like to move, but I don't need to. And I think you're right. It's a very negative tax in many ways. And I can't see them taking it off completely, but I can see them not putting it back on 500,000 and below for many years. Many years.
Okay. Well, I suppose we should say every little helps, shouldn't we?
Well, absolutely. I think that's a well-known saying, isn't it?
It is. I don't know where I've nicked that from.
No.
Well, look, we touched on the subject of valuers
Yes.
just before.
Yep.
Are you finding valuations being affected on your development, for instance?
Not at all at the moment, and that was my fear when we came back. Although we had the interest, we were, I was concerned the valuers might start down valuing all sorts of properties, and they're not, because if you're in a chain, it's not just about your property; it's
it's all the others.
It's all the others as well, and they haven't done so because the market, and they've been sensible about it, because actually the market dictates the price, and if you've got people who want to buy at that price, how on earth can any valuer really say no, it's not worth that? It's not. It doesn't matter. People often say to me, "Oh, my property's worth 500,000 or whatever," and I say, "Well, it doesn't actually matter what you think your property's worth, because you're not the one buying it. You own it. The only person that matters is the person who's going to buy it. And if they think it's only 450,000, guess what? It's 450,000.
Yes.
So, it's irrelevant in a way.
I'm just rather concerned that sort of pessimistic views will start to have an influence on values. I mean, I think we all know that Red Book valuations should not be influenced by future events or future predictions.
Absolutely.
They should be as of today.
Yes.
And it's very, very difficult to quantify if there is any loss or any subtlety today in the terms of values. And, I suppose the other thing is people should remember very clearly, you're only ever going to lose money if you actually sell something.
I think that's right. And that goes on, with, people talking about buying buy-to-lets now rather than waiting a year until perhaps the market's a bit softer. But actually, if you look at it over 20 years, does it really matter too much?
It's inconsequential.
I argue the fact that if you're already in the property market, if you're buying a bigger property, more expensive property, you're better off to buy now, because because actually you're saving, and the amount you're going to make is going to be more in the future, rather than stick with if you're already in the market. It doesn't really matter when you buy, in my view, or sell, because as long as you're replacing it with another property. If you're not in the marketplace, then you could argue, well, if I wait a year, they might be a little bit cheaper. But if you're looking to keep that property 20 years, does it really matter too much? The average increase in property in England over the last 20 years has been 5% per annum. Now that's obviously, we talk about micro markets, and some markets it's probably done better than that, other markets it's done worse than that. But building new houses isn't going to get any cheaper. Land really is not really going to get any cheaper. It might drop, land values might drop a little bit for a year or two, but ultimately it still costs the same to build a house, and probably more next year than it will this year with inflation. So actually, the underlying strength of the market is there, because the other thing, of course, is supply and demand. And we know that in the UK, there is a shortage of properties to live in, whether it's renting or purchasing. The one thing to remember is there's no shortage in Scotland. There's not a lot of shortage in Wales, and there's not much shortage up north. So people say, oh, there's a massive shortage. Yes, there is in the south. But just remember, if you're renting a property up north and it's not in a city centre, and then we don't know about city centres anymore, of course, going forward as well, they may have less demand. It's not the same as the south at the moment.
Okay. Now, let me just ask you, property finance, both from a development point of view and from a normal purchaser's point of view, I mean, we've got rock bottom rates at the moment.
haven't we?
So
who would have thought it
well,
20 years ago
do you
when we were doing lots and lots of
15%?
15%, yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess an average mortgage today would be around 3.5%.
I think you're being a bit miserly there. I think it's probably more like 2%.
Right. Okay.
That's on a residential side.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, first of all, with developers, are you finding it's the standard UK high street banks that are funding, or have we got more entrepreneurial lending?
I have
now?
to say that the time, I mean, we haven't used a high street bank to borrow money on property deals probably for 10, 15 years.
Right.
And the reason for that is they're not that interested.
No.
They're not interested, they're bloody slow, excuse my French. and their loan to ratio, their lending is probably not enough for most people.
Right.
So the loan to ratio is probably
typical?
50, 60%.
Really?
For us, that's okay, but for a lot of developers, they need to borrow the 75%. So what's happened since the last recession in 2008, all these property banks have, secondary banks have sprung up everywhere, lending not cheap money, not cheap. I mean, I struggle to get development finance at less than 5.5%.
Right.
And they're borrowing it off the Bank of England at 0.1 or whatever it is %. So these banks are making a fortune. Don't feel sorry for them. No. They're making a fortune.
And I mean, John, just a final thought on finance. I go back to my first purchase 100 years ago or whenever it was, and you'd pop along to the building society, you'd talk to the manager, he'd know where you worked, and he'd know where you're living, he'd know what you were going to buy.
Absolutely.
And you'd get good solid advice, and it would be a very considered process. He'd write you out a little chit that you'd take along to whoever you're buying from, and they'd say, oh, that's all right then, Do you think we've lost something with these specialist lenders?
I think the whole world has changed. It's changed since when you and I started developing. I'm still very active, as you know. It's changed completely. There isn't that personal touch anymore. Half the time, most of these people are doing them online. Don't even with a broker who is really the finance broker, has really replaced the bank manager. Even they don't really meet their clients. It's all done online. People don't want to meet each other. They can do it all on, which is great in a way, I suppose. It's all done online. It's quite quick. It's very efficient. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it's not quite the same. I mean, to be fair, I've got a new bank in Mayfair I'm using, and the managing director texts me and emails me on a Sunday, which is quite nice. It's a bit unusual. Cool. Yeah. Obviously, he wants to lend the money. He's saying, "Why haven't you borrowed the money, John? I've made the facility for you, and you haven't used it yet." And I'm saying, "Well, I will do soon." All right. But yeah,
John, thank you very much for joining us.
It's a pleasure as always.
Today. We'll be doing another programme very shortly where we've got some more property matters to discuss. Join us then.